Our senior, political affairs reporter Murimi Mwangi joining us from our city center studio just to give us an in-depth explanation of what we need to expect. Murimi Mwangi, good morning and thank you for joining us here on KTN News Center. So what does this mean now that the end of receiving views is coming to an end actually today?
Well, good morning, Brenda. It ends one phase of the validation process, but kickstarts what is arguably the most important phase of the Building Bridges initiative, and by extension, the ceasefire deal between President Uhuru Kenyatta and ODM leader Raila Odinga, because this is the phase where this team will be harmonizing all these recommendations that have been put before them under this particular phase to the initial document that was launched last year, make adjustments, changes, and of course, give recommendations on actions to actualize the recommendations that the steering committee will put forth in regard to the 9-point agenda. It is also an important phase because it comes at a time when there is the high-octane politics surrounding the BBI over its presumed potential impact on the pre-2022 succession politics, particularly on the question of governance, and key recommendations have been placed before the task force or the steering committee in this particular phase, some of these being a departure from the recommendations in the document that we saw launched at the Bomas of Kenya late last year. Just to pick a few, among these is the whole question of the structure of the executive, the question of inclusivity and deflating the heat from presidential polls in the future. There has been a departure or a contestation between what sort of premiership to adopt. Is it an executive prime minister, a non-executive prime minister, and the whole question of if the president and the PM should come from the same party or coalition, because that would also have implications on the place of the opposition in parliament and the new office that has been suggested in the initial BBI report, that of the official opposition leader. And therefore, this is a section of that report that will be closely watched even as the team prepares to retreat to hand in the final document. Remember, they have a deadline of the 30th of June. There is an option for extension, but going by the rate at which they have been able to, hold these sessions and close today, they don't appear to be keen on seeking an extension, as opposed to the initial phase where as the task force that was collecting views, it took them quite a while before they could begin their sessions, largely due to the bureaucracy that hampered allocation of the resources to the task force to kickstart their work. But of course, this time we saw them move with speed, and it will be expected that they might not seek that extension as they go about preparing that report, which, as I said, has been touted to be a key determinant on new formations, political formations, as well as the roadmap to the 2022 elections, Brenda.
And Murimi, I mean, today is the end, and you're saying that the committee might not even extend, their sitting for the sake of Kenyans who want to, give their views. So what happens to, the counties? Because there's some counties that have been getting views from residents and then handing over their recommendations, the consolidated recommendations to the committee. So what happens? Because this Saturday we expect one in Nakuru County.
Well, that will continue, Brenda. Remember, what the committee is winding up today is the sessions like the one they had today. Remember, their active mandate runs until the 30th of June, and therefore anybody will still be within the scope of that particular mandate of the committee to hand in their recommendations to the team. Remember, what they have been doing with these BBI sensitization forums is, much as there is the political talk and the rallies and the politicians speaking in these functions, before the sensitization rallies, there have been meetings of key stakeholders from the regions, and what usually happens is it is from these sittings that a memorandum of recommendations to the team is formulated, then presented to the task force. So that is expected to continue. But the active sitting sessions like the one we had today, where you have key stakeholders presenting the recommendations before the team, are the ones that are coming to a close today. And that, of course, will ease off time for the team to also get more recommendations from the grassroots, as well as go about harmonizing this into the final document, which, as I said, the deadline is the 30th of June. And therefore, a lot of backroom activities expected, particularly for the technical team that is working alongside the steering committee in the run-up to that deadline, which is the 30th of June, Brenda.
All right, Murimi, and finally from me, we've heard from different stakeholders giving their proposals, but what are the major, proposals that might end up changing, the report that was launched last year at the Bomas of Kenya?
Well, the cooperation deal between the president and the former opposition chief had set out a 9-point agenda. But the whole discussion and reason why governance appears to have taken prominence is there has been a presumption that it will be hard to achieve all these, the 9-point agenda, if you do not address the whole question of politics and governance. And that has been crystallized into the whole discussion on how to deflate the heat, the ethnic animosity that comes with contestation of the country's top seat, that being the presidency. And that was the genesis on the need to rethink the executive structure of government, moving away from the pure presidential system that was adopted under the 2010 Constitution to possibly a parliamentary system or a hybrid system where you of course share off some part of the presidential powers to equally powerful or not as powerful offices at the executive, that being the executive. And the whole discussion on the practicability of a parliamentary system to a political context as that of Kenya has been that much as the presidential system has its constitutional checks and balances, there is a narrative that even with the formulation of devolution under the 2010 Constitution, that the traditional imperial presidency has not been dealt with, and the thinking among the proponents of the expanded executive is that moving away from the presidential system would scale down the powers of the presidency to other offices, while at the same time opening up the platform for representation of more regions to be represented at the top of the executive. And also the whole question of the productivity of the cabinet as formulated under the 2010 Constitution, which was to be of persons that are not holding any other political offices. And therefore that came in the whole discussion about also taking the win from the current presidential system, where we have technocrats in cabinet and former politicians, so that in the whole discussion under the report that was launched last year, there would be a mix of technocrats and politicians, the politicians being serving members of the National Assembly. And the whole discussion about that is, had the country retained the traditional system where the cabinet would be drawn from parliament, then perhaps you might not have had the opportunity to have the likes of Dr. Fred Matiang'i sitting in the cabinet. And therefore, learning from the years following the enactment or the promulgation of the 2010 Constitution, as well as the country's previous cabinets since independence, where the members of the cabinet would come from among politicians who are presumed to spend more time with the people even when they are asking for the votes, that this whole mix would perhaps give Kenya the ideal system of the executive that would deal with the whole question of handling the pressure at the presidency, as well as the delivery within the offices of technocrats under the supervision of the mix of technocrats and politicians sitting in the cabinet. Brenda.
All right, thank you so much.